The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
The 2024 US elections have wrapped up, and Donald Trump has made history by becoming the second president to serve non-consecutive terms since 1897. For his supporters, it's a day of celebration, but there are some who are afraid. Those are the Mexican cartels, who know that Trump will come after them hard now and will use everything in his power to demolish them. They know Trump is ready to come after them like never before. In this video, I will discuss what Trump plans to do now that he's back in the White House. Expect bold moves like death sentences as he lays out new strategies to take down the cartels. The first thing on his agenda, a phone call to the Mexican president about the cartels. And according to Trump, it won't be a friendly phone call. Trump's big promise. Donald Trump's 2024 election campaign trail has been full of bold promises, but if there's one issue he has mentioned repeatedly, it's the war on drugs. For Trump, it's a mission he wears on his sleeve. He's taken a hardline approach, especially when talking about the situation at the southern border. You might remember one of his more controversial statements. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards and they're telling us what we're getting. His words struck a chord. Whether out of support or outrage, they definitely got people talking. So, what's Trump's plan if he returns to the White House? His primary target, Mexican drug cartels. And if you're wondering what that means, buckle up. It's a mix of covert ops, special forces, and no-holds-barred rhetoric. Trump isn't just promising tough talk. He's laid out a plan that sounds like it came straight out of a high-stakes action thriller. At the core of his approach is a promise to save American lives and curb the sky-high costs associated with drug enforcement. For context, the US has spent more than $1 trillion since 1971 on its drug policies. In 2023 alone, the federal drug control budget was a jaw-dropping $44.2 billion. Trump argues that this money can't keep flowing into the same old strategies that, in his eyes, have failed. Instead, he's pushing for something unprecedented, covertly deploying American special forces into Mexico with one mission: take down drug kingpins. In other words, you can imagine elite units trained for precision and impact, sent to dismantle the cartel leadership and infrastructure. Trump has said he wants to make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, and other overt and covert actions to inflict maximum damage on cartel leadership, infrastructure, and operations. This isn't just about border security, it's about bringing the fight directly to the source. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Trump's vision appears to involve acting with or without the Mexican government's consent. That would mean sending American operatives into sovereign territory on missions that blur the lines of international diplomacy. But that won't hold back Trump. You see, Trump isn't exactly known for mincing words, and when it comes to the war on drugs, he's as direct as ever. He has even hinted towards creating a kill list of drug lords for the US Special Forces to hunt down. It sounds intense, and that's because it is. According to Trump, it's about taking the fight directly to the source, targeting the very people he believes are responsible for flooding American streets with drugs and chaos. Trump has been vocal about another thing. He doesn't understand why the US hasn't already taken this approach. In his eyes, wiping out the heads of the cartels would send a powerful message, one of fear and consequence. The logic is simple: cut off the head and the rest will fall. Trump envisions a strategy where American operatives strike at the core of cartel operations, aiming to shatter their power structures and create shockwaves that ripple across the criminal underworld. In all honesty, the idea is both electrifying and deeply polarizing. Supporters see it as a necessary move to end the cycle of drugs and violence pouring into American communities. Critics, on the other hand, warn that this could escalate into a diplomatic nightmare or even spark wider conflict. One thing is certain: Trump's approach to the war on drugs would be unlike anything we've seen before. But this is not the only plan Trump has to dismantle the powerful Mexican cartels. Recently, he announced that under his administration, assets seized from criminal gangs and drug cartels would be redirected to help families affected by migrant crime. It's a move designed to hit where it hurts, taking away the profits and power from organized crime and turning it into support for victims. While asset seizure has been a long-standing tool used by federal agencies against drug trafficking organizations, Trump's vision adds a new twist, using those seized assets to directly benefit those harmed by violence and criminal activity. Former chief of the Drug Enforcement Administration Derek Maltz has supported Trump's stance on this and believes it to be a great way to unite American citizens. By the way, the DEA has long called asset seizure a potent weapon in the fight against organized crime. Trump sees it as more than just a tool for justice. He views it as a means of providing tangible support to families, redirecting dirty money money and seized goods to those who need it most. But Trump isn't stopping there. He's made it clear that he wants to take a hardline approach to drug offenders. His message is blunt and unequivocal. We're going to be asking everyone who sells drugs, gets caught selling drugs, to receive the death penalty for their heinous acts, because it's the only way. It's a position that leaves little room for compromise. Trump believes that without a tough stance, including capital punishment for drug dealers, the fight against the drug crisis will be futile. If we don't get tough on drug dealers, we're wasting our time, he said, doubling down on his belief that strict penalties are essential for meaningful change. Donald Trump has made it clear that dismantling drug cartels is a top priority, and he's laid out a multifaceted plan to achieve this. First on his list is bringing back his border policies with a vengeance. He wants to reinstate his previous border policies, emphasizing the completion of the border wall and enhancing security measures. But Trump's strategy doesn't stop at the border. He's ready to take the fight to the high seas with a total naval embargo on cartels. Now, what does that mean? This means the US Navy patrolling international waters, intercepting and seizing vessels suspected of ferrying narcotics. By choking off these maritime drug trafficking routes, Trump hopes to cut the cartels off at the source, making it much harder for them to push their deadly cargo into American communities. If that wasn't enough, Trump wants to raise the stakes even higher by labeling drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs. Why does that matter? This designation would open up a treasure trove of legal tools to take them down. Think increased surveillance, frozen assets, and tougher penalties for anyone caught aiding the cartels. It would also make international collaboration easier, allowing the US to work with allies to track and apprehend cartel members more effectively. Now, there is another aspect that you have to consider. Trump has openly said that the cartels run the Mexican government. This is a major statement as it highlights how Trump wants to destroy the cartel, even if there is no support given by the Mexican government. Also, Trump's claim that Mexican drug cartels have significant control over the Mexican government isn't just rhetoric. There's plenty of evidence showing just how deeply these criminal organizations have embedded themselves into Mexican society, politics, and even law enforcement. One of the most striking examples is the violence cartels use to exert power. Between 2000 and 2021, countless mayors and political candidates were murdered, often during election periods. That's not all. Recently, 34 candidates were assassinated by the drug cartels before the 2024 Mexican elections. Why? Because cartels target officials who stand in their way or support rival groups. This brutal violence sends a chilling message: cross us, and you pay the price. It's a powerful tool for gaining compliance and keeping political control over regions. Then there's the high-level corruption. Take Genaro Garcia Luna, for example, a former Secretary of Public Security in Mexico who was found guilty in the US for taking millions in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel. This isn't just some low-level official. Luna was a top security chief, showing just how far cartels can reach. By buying off key figures, cartels ensure they're shielded from law enforcement efforts and free to continue their illegal operations. Cartels don't just rely on fear and bribery. In places like Sinaloa, they've taken over entire sectors of the economy, like fishing, imposing their own rules, and even stepping in to provide public services usually handled by the government. It's not hard to see why many communities end up dependent on them. The cartels become more than just criminal organizations. They have become the government within Mexico with their own rules and systems. When it comes to politics, cartels are experts at manipulation. They don't just intimidate or bribe, they also interfere directly with elections. By threatening candidates, influencing who gets on the ballot, and rigging elections, they ensure that people who play by their rules end up in power. It's a frightening level of control that allows them to expand their influence and protect their interests. That said, critics of Trump are quick to call his claim against the Mexican cartels as false promises. They often point to his first term as evidence, arguing that his bold claims didn't amount to much when it came to dismantling drug networks. But brushing aside everything Trump did during his time in office would miss the full picture. He did put certain policies into play that, according to some, started showing signs of progress. Trump's focus on confronting cartel threats wasn't just empty talk. He introduced strategies that tightened border security and worked to disrupt drug trafficking routes. While not all of his measures succeeded in the way he envisioned, they laid a foundation for future efforts. That experience, for better or worse, gives him an edge whenever he takes another swing at solving this crisis. Trump's past dealings with the cartels highlight both the challenges of this battle and the potential pathways forward. Whether you're a supporter or a skeptic, it's clear that Trump's fight to end cartel influence in Mexico is not new territory for him. He has been fighting this battle for quite a while. Trump's long-standing fight to end Mexican cartel operations. Since Mexico first declared war on its drug cartels back in 2006, the United States has poured billions into supporting their efforts with security and counter-narcotics aid. And it's no wonder. This fight is a bloody and brutal one, claiming the lives of thousands of Mexicans every year. Politicians, students, journalists, nobody is safe. To put it into perspective, since 2006, Mexico has endured over 431,000 homicides. The violence is staggering, and the stakes couldn't be higher. It's not just Mexico that suffers either. The reach of the Mexican cartels extends deep into the United States, where they dominate the import and distribution of a host of drugs, including cocaine, fentanyl, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine. Most of the heroin and methamphetamine that finds its way into the US is produced by Mexican suppliers. Meanwhile, cocaine, largely produced in Colombia, is funneled into the US through Mexican criminal networks. And then there's fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's up to 50 times more potent than heroin. It's a deadly scourge, and Mexico, alongside China, has been a major source of this drug, which has fueled a devastating crisis. During Trump's first term as president, he was no stranger to the grim reality of the cartel's power and reach. But in 2019, things took an even darker turn. When 9 Americans were killed in Mexico by cartel gunmen, these 9 US citizens, 3 women and 6 children, were killed by drug cartel gunmen in northern Mexico. A burnt-out SUV was later found by the side of the road with the remains of some victims, and there are reports that other family members were shot at as they tried to flee. This horrifying incident lit a fire under Trump's rhetoric and commitment to fighting the cartels. For him, it was personal, a brutal reminder of the cartel's unyielding violence and their impact on American lives. At the time, President Donald Trump offered to help Mexico hunt the cartel members. He said, "If Mexico needs or requests help in cleaning out these monsters, the United States stands ready, willing, and able to get involved and do the job quickly and effectively." But nothing much was done by the Mexican authorities, and no arrests were ever made. That explains why Trump came up with a proposition that wasn't entertained during his first presidency stint. Do you know what he wanted to do at the time? Former US Defense Secretary Mark Esper spilled the beans in his memoir. According to Esper, Trump was dead serious about his war on the cartels. So serious, in fact, that he suggested launching missiles into Mexico to take out drug labs. Esper recalled that Trump brought up the idea not once, but at least twice. Fire missiles at drug labs, do it discreetly, and then deny any US involvement. The plan was to strike quietly, as Trump put it, so the world would never know who was behind it. It was a wild, almost cinematic vision of taking the fight to the cartels. But that wasn't the only bold move Trump had in mind. Esper also mentioned that Trump considered invading Mexico in what can only be described as a high-stakes gamble to cut off the flow of drugs at its source. Cooler heads ultimately prevailed, but the idea speaks volumes about Trump's willingness to think outside the box. Trump's determination to secure the southern border even extended to extreme measures involving migrants. He once floated the idea of shooting at migrants attempting to cross the border, showcasing just how far he was willing to go in the name of border security. While these proposals sparked intense controversy, they also underscored Trump's resolve to tackle the drug crisis and border issues head-on, albeit in ways that are extreme. And while Trump didn't actually go through with these ideas, he did implement one thing. You see, Trump has always been very vocal about the Mexican government's unsatisfactory response when it comes to fighting against drugs. Trump has repeatedly said that all he wants is a more sincere and direct approach from the Mexican authorities, and that specific non-serious response from the Mexican government for years was one of the key reasons why Trump wanted to build the wall in the first place. I'm talking about the wall, which was a critical part of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign platform. Throughout his campaign, Trump called for the construction of a border wall to combat illegal immigration. He promised that Mexico would pay for the wall's construction by a 20% tariff on Mexican goods. During his first term, Trump prioritized the construction of a border wall along the US-Mexico boundary. By the end of his tenure, approximately 450 miles of barriers were completed, primarily replacing outdated structures with more robust designs. With his recent re-election, President Trump has reaffirmed his commitment to enhancing border security. He plans to resume and expand the construction of the border wall, aiming to cover additional miles and fortify areas that remain vulnerable. So much so that he has made a big claim recently about what he'll do once he's in the White House. On his final day of campaigning, Trump said that he would dial up Mexico's new president on his first day in office to inform her he would slap a 25% tariff on imports from her country. Talking about the new Mexican president Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, Trump said, "I haven't met her, and I'm going to inform her on day one or sooner that if they don't stop this onslaught of criminals and drugs coming into our country, I'm going to immediately impose a 25% tariff on everything they send into the the United States of America. That threat to Mexico wasn't done there. He then said, if that doesn't work, I'll make it 50, and if that doesn't work, I'll make it 75, then I'll make it 100. Love him or hate him, Trump's aggressive stance against the cartels has always been fueled by a belief that drastic times call for drastic measures. Whether these ideas were ever realistic or viable, they reflect a leader determined to leave no stone unturned in the fight against drugs pouring into the US. That said, it also sheds light on how Trump fought the war on drugs during his first presidency, a topic he proudly shares with his supporters. He often mentions those policies to taunt the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris administration, claiming they failed the American people with their weak approach to the war on drugs. But is there any truth to his claims? You'll be a better judge of that after you learn about the facts. Trump versus Biden and Harris. Who handled the war on drugs better? Simply put, Trump handled the war on drugs better than the Biden-Harris administration. When it comes to tackling the war on drugs, Trump's aggressive approach focused on border security, cartel crackdowns, and decisive action stands in stark contrast to the Biden-Harris administration's policies that focused more on harm reduction and public health initiatives. However, to fully understand why and where Trump's policies were more effective, it's essential to look at data and statistics, comparing key metrics such as drug overdose rates, drug seizures, and cartel-related violence during both administrations will offer a clearer picture. Let's start with Trump first, to look closer at how he tackled the opioid crisis. He made it a priority to stop the influx of dangerous drugs, particularly fentanyl, into the United States. His strategy? Boost border security and clamp down on international and domestic drug suppliers. One of the most striking results of these efforts came in 2018. At the southern border, between official entry points, US Customs and Border Protection managed to intercept an enormous quantity of fentanyl, enough in fact to potentially result in around 90 million deaths of Americans. This feat highlights the scale of the opioid problem and the intensity of the measures taken to prevent these drugs from entering the country. But Trump's initiative wasn't just about stopping fentanyl at the border. From 2017 to 2021, the broader enforcement efforts across the nation were just as vigorous. The DEA seized over 16,000 kilograms of heroin and nearly 5,000 kilograms of fentanyl during this period. Customs and Border Protection's enforcement actions at the southern border and via postal inspections led to a substantial increase in fentanyl seizures, which were crucial in the effort to curb the flow of deadly drugs into the country. It makes sense, since they achieved a 1,000% increase in international parcel seizures and a 750% increase in domestic parcel seizures related to synthetic opioids. Moreover, Trump's administration implemented significant policies to combat the opioid crisis, focusing on reducing supply, demand, and enhancing recovery options for affected individuals. The administration's efforts included securing $6 billion over 2 years to fight opioid abuse and awarding $1.5 billion annually for state opioid response grants, which helped fund various treatment, prevention, and law enforcement initiatives across the United States. On the demand side, the Trump administration launched public awareness campaigns that reached 1.4 billion views, aimed at educating Americans about the dangers of opioid misuse. These efforts contributed to a significant reduction in opioid prescriptions and misuse among adolescents and adults. Furthermore, to aid recovery, the administration expanded access to naloxone, a life-saving drug used to reverse opioid overdoses, and supported the expansion of treatment options across various states. This comprehensive approach showcased a commitment to tackling the opioid epidemic from multiple angles, aiming to reduce the devastating impact of this crisis on American communities. On the other hand, Joe Biden is widely considered the architect of America's disastrous war on drugs. Why is that? Well, you'll soon learn about the immense damage he did to America's war on drugs. You see, Joe Biden's role in shaping America's war on drugs is a controversial and dark chapter in the nation's history. As a US senator from Delaware, Biden played a major part in passing laws that many believe fueled mass incarceration and unfairly targeted minority communities. It all started in the 1980s, when there was a growing fear of drug use and rising crime rates. Biden stepped forward as a tough-on-crime leader, helping to pass the 1984 Comprehensive Crime Control Act. This law introduced mandatory minimum sentences for drug-related crimes and allowed law enforcement to seize property from people suspected of being involved with drugs, even without a conviction. This practice led to countless stories of ordinary people losing their homes and savings, even if they were never proven guilty. The 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act was another cornerstone of Biden's legislative agenda. Under his leadership, the law imposed a severe disparity in sentencing between crack and powder cocaine offenses, a 100:1 ratio. Crack cocaine, more commonly used in poorer black communities, resulted in far harsher penalties than powder cocaine, predominantly used by wealthier, white Americans. As a result, countless black Americans were locked away for minor drug offenses, causing devastating damage to their families and communities. Biden defended these tough measures at the time, presenting himself as a protector of law and order. Biden's most controversial contribution to the war on drugs came with the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. As the leader of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he helped create and push through this massive crime bill. It poured billions of dollars into building new prisons, expanded the list of crimes eligible for the death penalty, and created stricter sentencing laws. Supporters argued that the law was necessary to combat crime, but it also led to mass incarceration, especially of non-violent drug offenders. The effects of this bill are still felt today, with the US prison population remaining one of the largest in the world. Many believe that Biden's work helped create a system that criminalized addiction rather than offering help, and it hit black and brown communities hardest. And just so you may know, mass incarceration and mandatory minimum sentencing laws not only destroyed innocent lives and tore apart families, but also cost the American taxpayers $182 billion annually. The damage caused by these policies was severe. Entire neighborhoods were torn apart, with many people spending years or even decades in prison for low-level drug offenses. The focus on punishment instead of treatment made it harder for individuals struggling with addiction to find help and rebuild their lives. Critics argue that Biden's role in this era shows how deeply flawed and harmful the war on drugs approach was. As president, he has pushed for changes like decriminalizing marijuana and pardoning people with federal convictions for simple marijuana possession. But for many people, these changes are seen as coming far too late. While they are a step in the right direction, critics argue they cannot fully undo the harm caused by policies that Biden himself once championed. His past actions serve as a painful reminder of how destructive the war on drugs has been for millions of Americans. But the problematic part is that Biden didn't really learn too much from his past mistakes, nor did Kamala Harris. Biden never apologized for the bill, even after Bill Clinton admitted his mistake and said, "I signed a bill that made the problem worse, and I want to admit it." Instead, Biden just said in 2020 that he will learn from that and try to make amends. And there's a reason why Biden never apologized, because the Democrats always felt proud to mention Biden as the golden boy who played a big role in the war on drugs. But this narrative quickly changed when Biden became the president. And in an attempt to undo the damage he inflicted with his policies years ago, the Biden administration took steps to address the opioid epidemic, including expanding access to addiction treatment and supporting harm reduction strategies. The goal was to reduce the impact of earlier policies that continue to pose significant obstacles in effectively addressing drug abuse today. But that didn't help. In fact, there were an estimated 107,543 drug overdose deaths in the United States during 2023. On the other hand, the number of drug overdose deaths in 2020 was 91,799. Many experts believe that the increase in drug overdose deaths during Trump's administration was because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But there was no excuse for the Biden administration for such an alarming increase in the number of drug overdose deaths during his presidency. It goes without saying that Biden failed on so many levels when it came to effective leadership in the war on drugs. Now, with Trump back for a second term, there's hope he'll follow through on his promise to take down the cartels and make real progress in the fight against drugs. Many believe that by staying tough on enforcement and working closely with international partners, he could make a real impact on America's ongoing struggle with drug addiction and crime. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, check out the suggested content on your screen by clicking one of the cards displayed.